Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here this afternoon. My name is Taryn Sebula, and I'm a Senior Manager of Member Engagement here at the Toronto Region Board of Trade. Thank you again for joining us this afternoon for our valued member Community Living Toronto's workshop on bridging business and social impact, your journey into social enterprise. For those interested in our venue, anyone can rent our gorgeous state-of-the-art multi-use event venue called The Key. And if you are a member of the board, you can enjoy a special 25% discount. Feel free to visit bot.com for more information or just grab me at the end of the presentation if you'd like to learn more about how to host a corporate or private event at our venue for an unforgettable experience. Now, speaking of unforgettable experiences, today we welcome Community Living Toronto's CEO, Brad Saunders, to explore the world of social enterprises, where business meets social impact and discover how to create businesses that make a meaningful difference in our communities. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge this land on which we are meeting is home to diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. The board's offices are located on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. They share with us a sense of responsibility for intergenerational equity, the well-being of today and tomorrow. Now, without further ado, I'll pass the mic over to Brad to get things started.
Thanks for that, Taryn, and thanks for the land acknowledgement. Community Living Toronto is also, as I'm sure many of you are, on our own journey of reconciliation and trying to figure out what our part is in the truth and reconciliation process that our country needs to go through. And it's particularly poignant for our sector. Community Living Toronto supports individuals, children, and adults with an intellectual disability, which means, practically, that their daily functioning is impaired in some way. Sometimes to a minor degree where they, might need a little bit of support or a little bit of extra guidance, all the way up to people that might need support 24/7 with their activities of daily living. And for many years, the practice in this province, and indeed around the world, was to institutionalize people in residential settings that were very similar to the residential schools. It's not the same, but it's very much aligned with the truth and reconciliation journey that we're all on. It's always gratifying when you put your name to something or you're invited to present and people actually come. So thank you for spending the next half hour or 40 minutes listening, and I hope to have some conversation as well around this. I'm going to start off with two things that sort of maybe set the stage a little bit. First of all, we've handed out a few copies of our annual report. And Community Living Toronto, it's a fair question. What do we know, or why are we interested in social enterprise? And what kind of title is Bridging Business and Social Impact for a charity? What we generally do, what our bread and butter is, our purpose, our mission, is supporting people with an intellectual disability throughout their life journey. That can be their parents, and them, it can be siblings, it can involve employment, places to live, things to do, education. We do a lot of stuff. I just left visiting one of our programs in sort of the Junction area, and I spent about a half an hour with a guy named Jonathan, really good guy in his late 20s. He had a roommate who passed away earlier this summer. They were about the same age, and they both had the same condition that they were dealing with. Really good, and I had been there a few years ago just in between one of the breaks of COVID and toured there with one of our ministers from the provincial government. And the two of them were a bit of a dynamic duo. And sadly, his roommate passed away over the summer in his early 30s, which is sort of typical or not uncommon for people with his condition. And Jonathan read to me the obituary that he read at his friend's funeral. It was really touching. And those are the kinds of things that Community Living Toronto is often involved with. That's our reason for being, so that people like Jonathan have a place in their community, that they can make friends, that they can be appreciated and be invited to do a eulogy at their friend's funeral, should it ever come to that. The other thing I'd like to point out is I'm wearing, I don't know how to do this, but I'm wearing a pair of socks that I won't pull them up too high just to keep this G-rated. There's a movement that we are part of associated with, run by the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence. They had their inaugural summit last week in Ottawa, with the idea being that they want Canada to become the best place to both give and receive care in the world. It's sponsored by the Israeli Foundation, which is a large foundation that does a lot of work both in Canada and in Israel and as well as around the world. They gave out these socks to people that attended, so if you had attended, I've got an extra pair if anyone is interested. But I do think you can always use a good pair of socks, right? The point of their work is really that we're all in caregiving roles. You know, my parents are aging, and eventually there'll be some caregiving. I'll return the favor for them taking care of me when I was growing up. And we're in our volunteer roles, and some of us are part of faith communities, whatever it might be, where you're involved in your community and helping people. There's also the other side of caregiving, which is care providing, and in their language, that's people that are paid to do caregiving. That's staff that we support. We have about 1,200 people that work for us doing this work every day. It could be nurses, it could be PSWs. We became very familiar with who caregivers are throughout COVID, and they're really emphasizing that. So if you get a chance, check out the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence and the work that they're doing in this area. It's a national movement to try and align a lot of policies that really will help us. So now the regularly scheduled event, social impact. This was a quote that I could loosely attribute to Justin Trudeau. Don't know what your political affiliations are, but I didn't write it down verbatim. But this was the sentiment around some work that the federal government is doing, is that charity and government are historic sources of funds to support social services. A third area, which is growing, is earned income. So for an organization like ours, we're getting into thinking about what profit were the purpose and trying to find sources of patient capital, ways to fund what we do. The question would be, why would we do that? Let's go through a couple of these. So charitable giving in Canada. We are very generous as a nation in what we donate, second largest in the world. There's, more than 80,000 charities across the country. Lots and lots of billions go towards charity every year. It's a big part of the Canadian economy. Where people give, almost half of the money that is provided charitably in our country goes to religion. That's people giving to their churches, mosques, temples, whatever it might be. It drops off significantly from there into health, social services, and then international development and all the way on down. Our sector, which is Community Living Toronto, is in developmental services, is a real subsection of the social service sector. And charity is a competitive business, and there's to get into some of the business workings of charity. There are tiers within charity, and social service agencies like ours are sort of a B and a C level in terms of people's interest. Most of the money that we receive comes from the people that we've had an impact in their lives. So if it's a family member or somebody that we've touched or is a neighbor close to us, they're likely to give. But people on the street typically don't. I used to, my daughter, who's now 18, whenever her friends were doing, a school project where they had to do something for the community, they do fundraising. And who do you think they fundraised for? Any? Sick kids was always top of mind. We sort of joke in a friendly way that sick kids doesn't fundraise, they pick up the phone. We don't have that problem. Charitable fundraising is very hard. People work very hard for money, and it's hard to get them to give to charitable causes. Come on in, have a seat. We're all just getting started. This was an article in the Toronto Star during COVID. COVID was very difficult on our sector. Our workforce became essential caregivers. We had, as many of us were working from home and not leaving, we had, 1,000 staff each day going back and forth. And if you remember early days of COVID, streets were empty. Police were out making sure that you were only there if you had a good reason. We had to give letters to our staff. We had staff stopped on the way to work to verify that they were actually going in the right spot. But a lot of that flew under the radar because of everything else that was happening. In Ontario, right, almost 8 or 9,000 people living in long-term care lost their lives during COVID. our sector had impacts, but not as significant. So we did very well. However, we were kind of under the radar. So it was a real strain for us. Government really stepped up, but it was just a reinforcement to us that we're not top of mind for people. Again, I sort of talked about some of these challenges, but this is some of the challenges that we face in terms of fundraising for things that we want to do to extend our mission as well. I'll get this little pointer here, see if this works. Barely, not really. Aging donor base. The demographics of how people give is definitely changing. My parents, even myself at times, I used to, you get a charity or 2 or 5 that you like. You might sign up for a monthly donation. You go to the event. You stick with them over time. More and more, charitable donations are driven by line of sight. You want to see where your money's going. You don't want it to go to administrative overhead and all those kinds of things. We all know these stories about the sort of GoFundMe campaigns where a bus driver is made fun of driving by some students driving home, and somebody puts up a GoFundMe and suddenly she's got $300,000 in the bank because everybody thought that was a really good story, right? On the other side of that, raising $300,000 for us is a lot of work, and it takes a lot more than 48 hours. So there is this sort of, in the way fundraising is done, it's really shifted. The way there's been disruption in many fields, fundraising is exactly the same way, and people like to give direct. Community Living Toronto, we do well. We do fairly well at fundraising. Well, I should say we do a lot of work at it, and we're proud of what we do. But this is some of the major areas that we are involved with. And we do a lot throughout the year. We sort of pace ourselves. We've got a good, dedicated staff, so we're always doing something. And then finally, our big fundraising event that we do every 2 years, I mention this just because it's on Saturday. It's called Community Rocks. It's a great party with a purpose. I think we're sold out, or I'd be trying to sell you some, showing you a QR code to buy some tickets. But it's a sponsored event. We gross about $650,000 at the event, with about 50% of that being revenue. So again, it's a lot of work. We do it every 2 years, and it's successful. But again, it's compared to our agency budget, which is just over $100 million, most of which comes from government. It's a relatively modest amount. And again, I'm not complaining about fundraising. I'm just sort of setting the stage, right? The other source of this is sort of where our donors, our stuff comes from. And as I mentioned earlier, individual donors and event supporters, the vast majority of where we get funding. It's people that we touch in their lives. They're the ones that tend to donate to us. Toronto is also blessed with very generous corporate donors and sponsors as well. Government funding is the other source of revenue for most social service agencies in the Canadian context, and that's true for us as well. Our budget last year was about $100 million. The bulk of that, about 80%, comes from the province. We get some money for the City of Toronto. We have a staff of 30 that works with childcare centers across the city. Oftentimes when a parent has a child with a disability, the journey they start off on life is much different than the one many of us went through, right from day one. Where do you go for childcare? If you're going, it's very easy for a childcare center to say, you know what, that kid looks like a lot more work than I think we can accommodate. I've got to take care of 15 or 20 or 50 other kids within this center. I don't think we can do it. Our staff go in and help those childcare centers make sure that they feel confident enough to bring kids in. We get money from the City of Toronto for that. We also get some grant money and also some federal funding. The challenge is, there's a bit of a myth out there. Before I was in this kind of work, you would think, well, if you get government money, every year you get a couple extra percent. You have to figure out where to spend it. If you don't spend it, it gets lost. That is an absolute myth. This chart here goes back to 1992, 93. So we've been in business now. This is our 75th anniversary. We've been getting money from 1992, 1993. We were funded to take people in from various circumstances in the city at a certain rate in 1992. For the most part, that money that we were provided then has stayed the same for the last 20 or 30 years. It just doesn't change. There's sort of sometimes there's investments across the province. New people come in and you adjust your budgets. But generally, it's a very static environment. This chart on the left here, that Julia in the back here works with us as well, produced, talks about what our base funding changes. So base funding is the amount that you can count on from government every year, assuming you're meeting your contractual obligations, et cetera. That stayed pretty static, but the CPI over the last amount of time, especially in the last 12 months, has really skyrocketed. So their government funding, for a lot of reasons, doesn't keep up with demand just for what you're already doing, let alone we're an organization that has a mission. We're ambitious. We want to be part of our communities. We want to see people with disabilities fitting in and being part of their communities. We want to do innovative stuff. If we're going to do that, where do we go? We've taken the approach of getting into the world of social enterprise. And social enterprise is really having an impact, running a business as a business with the purpose of having an impact. The focus is on generating a profit that goes back to the organization. In the Community Living Toronto context, we've started a for-profit organization called Groundworks. It's a wholly owned subsidiary of Community Living Toronto. We are the only shareholder, but it is a for-profit corporation. Unfortunately, in Ontario, there's very few options around how you structure your corporations, right? In other jurisdictions across Canada and in the world, there are what they call sort of social enterprises or that give you a little bit more latitude on what the profit is, and you don't have to be a full for-profit corporation. We don't have that option in Ontario. So our advice from our lawyer, who's fantastic, was like, just you've got the most freedom and the most control if you organize as a social purpose, as an incorporated for-profit organization. So we've done that. We've got 3 main projects that we're working on, and I'll touch on them briefly. This is a building that just opened. It's at Birchmount and Lawrence. It's an affordable housing project, and it's the second one we've done with this builder. There's about 300 units in there. We have about 30 of those units spread throughout the building. And people with a disability of varying needs are living in those buildings. They just actually moved in. One woman named Kelly, who I follow on Facebook, has been for a year. You know that excitement when you're getting a new car, you're getting a new house. You want to see how it's going, how the building's coming up. She's been posting religiously about the progress of her building and taking pictures, and she just moved in about 3 weeks ago. It's really great to see. The builder of this, a guy named Tim, runs a development company called Mahogany Homes. They had this podium space in the lower floor. We get along well with Tim. He sees us as sometimes innovative and resourceful, and he said, could you use some space over here? And we said, yes, we could. And then we had to figure out what we do with that space. What we decided was we would open a social enterprise coffee shop called the Social Brew Cafe and Marketplace. We're not going to make a lot of money with a 1,000 square foot coffee shop, so we thought, what if we connect with, because one of the pieces of social enterprise is you want to make sure you're having impact beyond just the profit. We reached out to some farmers in Kenya who, I won't get into what the coffee market is like, but it's not often favorable to the actual farmers of the coffee. I've got some other pictures, but these are quite lush coffee fields. The field that's right over here next to the guy, this is a woman that is the coffee farmer. Her son is in here. Sam is her son. This guy's a roaster. They love the coffee stuff, but they can't make enough money at it. So many of the coffee plants, I didn't know this, can live for decades. 60, 70, 80-year-old coffee plants. It's really impressive. A lot of them are being plowed under because they can't make any money in the coffee industry, even though coffee prices are pretty high. And what they were complaining about was that they take pride in their coffee. The neighbor didn't. It all gets scooped up and harvested into one big bin, and everybody gets the same price. So they were trying to find a way to get into the market in the West. We, through a bunch of circumstances, with one of our partners, came across this group. So we are now going to import coffee from Kenya to our first flagship coffee shop in Scarborough that will open in December. We'll do an online e-commerce site, and we'll grow it out from there. We hope to open a number of shops around the city, similar kind of thinking to like Dark Horse Cafe, that kind of thing. Coffee industry in Canada is really fascinating. It's 80% controlled by two corporations, right? So for the retail stuff, it's Starbucks, Tim Hortons, obviously, and then McDonald's is in there a little bit. And then for like the stuff you buy, it's basically Loblaws and Costco are the big players. So there's not a lot of room. But for those of us that have traveled to other countries, there's some really cool coffee shops in other parts of the world that are just sort of boutique and that. We don't really have a big market like that here. We're hoping to be on the cutting edge of that as some organizations, as other people sort of do this kind of work, especially with the link back to coffee, or to farmers in other countries. So that's one enterprise that we're involved with. The other thing that we have started to do, and this is also a Kenya-based project, is called Athari People. Athari is the Swahili word for impact. We have in our sector a lot of turnover for staff. So our turnover rate in the last number of years has been an alarming and destabilizing 20 to 25% a year. And the type of work that people are doing, it's relational. So, you know, if you live in a home and you've got a staff coming in, and sometimes they're doing personal care, if that person is every fifth day or every fifth person is turning over, you know, you're getting to know new people constantly. You don't know who's coming and going. It's not good for quality. There just are not enough people to do these jobs. Our organization right now has more than 100 vacancies that we are trying to fill, knowing that over the next year, 20% of those new hires will be moving on. The staffing shortage is not exclusive to our sector. We know that. It's everywhere from lawyers to doctors to everything throughout the economy, but we are impacted. What we have done in Kenya is we have partnered with a challenge we've got too is if you're bringing in foreign workers to provide support for some of the most vulnerable people in the province, you want to make sure you know who's coming and that they know what they're getting into and that relationship is going to work out. So the idea of sort of looking at lists, and I don't know if you've dealt with immigration firms before, but there's sort of a list that comes out and this is a person's qualifications and you try and do that match. That for us felt too impersonal. So what we've done is partnered with two colleges in Nairobi. This is the professor of social work at that college. We developed a curriculum with a professor at George Brown College. It's a 4-month program where the students will take that course a few days a week. They'll do a placement in a healthcare facility or disability organization in Nairobi. We will match them with an employer here. Not just us, there's 200 of our organizations like ours across the province. They'll develop a relationship over 4 months. They'll get to screen them and meet them and find out what they need to come to Canada and settlement services and all that kind of thing. And then we'll go through the LMIA process. It's a labor market impact assessment. You have to prove that there's a need in Canada, which is a lot easier now than it used to be, and government is starting to get better at streamlining those processes. We've met with the Canadian High Commission in Nairobi. Say what you want about bureaucrats at times. I worked for the Ontario Public Service for a while. There's a lot of passion in a lot of our foreign service doing really great work, so they're quite supportive. The Kenyan government has also been very supportive of this initiative. When we met, we were very cautious about, we didn't want to make sure that we were doing any kind of brain drain or taking away a skilled workforce that is needed in Kenya or any country and bring them here because we need it as well. What we learned about Kenya is this is actually part of their economic stabilization plan. They graduate 1 million students a year into the workforce. They simply don't have enough jobs for them. And we, last time we were there, met a group of about, this isn't a great picture, but we met a group of about 30 people who'd traveled 5 hours to meet with us. And these were nurses or community development workers, people that were passionate about this work, and they wanted to know what the need was in Canada and how they could do that work. So we have our first cohort starting at the beginning of December. 36 students will be going to one of the 2 colleges that we're working with. We're in the process of matching students with employers here, and we will see how that goes. Employers that are bringing people in, there is a fee connected with that. And then students on the other end have to pay a fee. There's the course that they'll take costs about $600 US. There are some other costs around the immigration process. We initially looked at doing it for free, but we're quickly told, no, you need people that not just people that want to come here, but that are actually interested in the work and have the passion and interest and commitment around doing it. So that's another initiative that we are involved with. This is our most ambitious project that we're doing. We own housing is a massive issue across the whole city. When you add on disability and developmental disability, it's even more so. We've got a 4.7 acre piece of land at Birchmount and McCowan that we've had since the 60s. It's an old school building that hasn't served our purposes for a long time. And we have partnered with Tridel to do one of the most, what we think is one of the most innovative and large-scale projects across the country around affordability and inclusion. So this will be a 5-building project that will take place. Building's tough, right? Because you got to get approvals and it's a long process. But it could take up to 10 years, could be as quick as 6 or 7. One of the buildings, this one here, will be a Community Living Toronto owned and operated rental building that will be 50% market rent, 30% will be affordable rent, and then 20% will be for people that we support with a developmental disability, spread throughout the building. So units will be scattered. So we're trying to build that inclusive kind of community. This is the sort of architect's mock-up of what we're trying to get across. It's not just a special place for special people. It's a community where everyone belongs. The other 4 buildings will be Tridel built and designed condominium buildings. What's different about that, and Tridel was involved very early in development in Scarborough. They're one of the first developers to build high-rise in Scarborough, so they know that market well. They haven't been there for about 10 years, but they're back in with this project. Up to 20% of the units in each of those condo buildings are available for purchase by ourselves as an organization or for people with disabilities. We're still working out that piece of it because the federal government has an affordable housing strategy that we're hoping to tap into and have gotten favorable signs there. And again, units spread throughout the building of different types, people of different tenure throughout. And then it's not just us selling the land to Tridel, we have partnered with Tridel. So we've created a separate, another for-profit organization where we're developing it with them. Our contribution is the land, as well as our charm and personality, which I got to tell you doesn't count for much, but the land is our contribution. They have been a fantastic partner in all this. I can't believe we were so fortunate to come across and work with them. It's been a good match. So anyway, those are the big projects that we're doing. In terms of social enterprise, it is a growing ecosystem around the world. If you're interested in doing this yourself or know anybody that would be interested, there is a Social Enterprise World Forum that happens, it used to be every 2 years. Now they seem to happen all over the place. There was just one in Amsterdam where there was more than 2,000 people attended. And again, these are a mix of not-for-profits, people with small enterprises. One of the women on this panel here, they make jeans that are recyclable. So she was Italian. You wear your jeans until you're done with them with the agreement that you send them back when you're done with them, and then they recycle the denim I didn't even know that was a thing. And then they put out, they do this, that's the value proposition going back. So there's lots of really cool, innovative stuff, often linked with big social problems, right? Pollution, genes use a lot of water to produce that kind of thing. So there's really cool stuff that's happening. Edinburgh, Scotland, has got one of the most developed social enterprise ecosystems in the world, so much so that they have a social enterprise academy that you can learn about all things social enterprise. Canada's got into this space in a couple of big ways. One is the Sustainable Finance Fund that they've developed. The federal government has, let me just point out, there are some really cool spots in Canada that are doing this as well on the coasts. BC's got a very developed social enterprise ecosystem, and so does Halifax. If you ever have a chance, I hope my kids move to Halifax because it's a very cool kind of space that they've built there. Just really was impressed with what they're doing there. The government of Canada has started what they're calling a social finance fund. It was a lot of money, $775 million that they've allocated out to 3 basically investment funds that will be looking to fund ventures, sort of $500,000 up. The one that they haven't released yet what the programs are, but the one fund called Boan Capital has 5 projects they're going to fund, with the most being $10 million. So these are, anything from $250,000 to $500,000 all the way up to larger investments. Just quickly around lessons learned before we chat for a bit. What we've learned going through this and seeing what others have done, there's a lot of great ideas. Don't copy. Copy if you're good at it, but do what you're good at. And this is more for people in the charitable space. You tend to just do the same old things. One of our partners that we've worked with is called Corbrook. It was a former sheltered workshop that did packaging. They took that knowledge of packaging and when sheltered workshops changed and they started paying their individuals minimum wage and expanded the workforce, and they do packaging. They're now one of the largest co-pack facilities in the country, and all of that money goes back into the charity that they run. And they didn't get the idea of, hey, let's try packaging. They already had that experience, and they expanded about that. So that's been key for us. Do what you're good at. Do what you know. The idea, this is just, I think, just business 101. Have a realistic view of where you're going to get to, what profit you're going to get, and recognize that entrepreneurship, it's tough. It's a lot of sledding. It's tough sledding. It's pushing balls uphill all the time. It's satisfying and gratifying, but it's not. What's the saying that you'll be an entrepreneur? You don't want to work because you don't want to work 40 hours for somebody else, but you'll work 80 hours for yourself, kind of thing. That is definitely true. The organizational and corporate culture is corporate structures really work. One of the reasons that we started a for-profit organization, if as a charity we start offering services and charging for them, we could lose our charitable status, because there's HST rules, and you've got to do things within the charitable exemption, because our profits we're not charged tax. You can't use that as a dodge. You've got to be very careful around how you organize your governance. The other thing is, and this is a thing we've seen a lot, is the sunk cost fallacy, where you have a great idea and everybody's behind it. You get into it for 2 years and 3 years, and you've spent $100,000 or $200,000 making something work, and then you realize this ain't gonna fly. And then you'll have a group of people that go, we just need one more thing. We'll just keep going away. We'll just keep going at it, and we're gonna win. But make sure you've got external people saying, no, we had these goals, we didn't achieve them, it's time to step out and let this one go to the next. Pivot quickly if things aren't working. The last 2 things, partner with those who complement your skills. We do a lot of work, as I mentioned, in this organization called Corbrook. We as organizations enjoy working with each other. Myself as CEO and their CEO get along, which really helps. And they bring skills around nimbleness and connection to market and some other things that we don't have. And then we're bringing some other things, scale and connections in other areas that they don't. So those kind of complementary things work well. finally, I always, we're in the human service industry, so be ambitious, have fun, and create impact. We're big believers in social enterprises being one of the ways of addressing a lot of the social issues and pressures that we're facing in Canada. Thank you. So I'm happy to take questions, or we can mingle and have a coffee. Yeah. Yeah. So how did we choose Kenya, and how did we choose that model? I'd love to say we did a whole big survey and stuff. One of our partners, we had the idea around coffee and wanted to understand that market. We went there. When we were there, we realized how good a workforce there was and how keen people were to come, how keen the government was and how keen people were to emigrate to Canada. So that became our second business idea. Could we have done that? And if your question is, could we have partnered with somebody here to do it, or? Yes. I see. I see. Yeah, great. It's sort of a version of social impact FOMO, right? So, the, you know, you, we can't change the world, but we can change the part of the world that we touch. So whether it's Kenya and whether Corbrook does a lot of work with local farmers and vendors here. I didn't get into this too much detail around the social brew cafe, but one of the things that we're doing there is we're calling it Cafe and Marketplace because it will be a store for that building. And people are on fixed incomes. We're planning to use locally sourced suppliers for frozen dinners and stuff that people want to pick up stuff on their way. So we're trying to get at that, but it's a good point. You've just got to make your choices, right? And there's no rules. If you're a for-profit organization, you get to choose where you want to have impact. We thought there was some cachet around having a social impact, social enterprise that had a direct source sort of bean to cup. So people are benefiting with employment in Ontario and Canada, and it's also benefiting people in, who are growing these coffee beans. But, other people could take a different view. But I don't know if that gets at your question, but it's what we went through to get there. Great point. And the way we think of social enterprise is that it's not a short-term strategy for grant. It's to get out of that cycle of being dependent on grants. So it's finding a business model and scaling it in such a way that it will create the revenue so that you're not reliant on grants. Grants are gravy, and they allow you to innovate or do whatever, but you've got stable funding from a source that you can control. And again, the types of social enterprise that people have gotten into, it's been consulting. There's a group we've worked with out of Halifax that does recruiting. They want to do recruiting in a more humane way, right? And that's what they've built up. They've won awards in the Halifax area around this. It's Partners for Good. Placemaking for Good. So that's the thinking. It's to get out of that cycle of, because it's deadly trying to work for grants, and the grants always say, okay, we'll give you this, and what's your contribution? And I always go, my contribution? I don't have anything to contribute. We're hand to mouth here, but there is still that expectation around a lot of funders that you contribute something as well, which just kind of makes it tough. Yeah. Well, if you want to get into a social enterprise model, again, our experience was it was better to set up a separate for-profit organization. And in our case, it's a wholly owned subsidiary of Community Living Toronto. So they're the only shareholder, 100% shareholder. And then finding something that you're good at, or you think you can be good at, and then running that like a business so that you're trying to make as much money as you can to support the social enterprise. Along the way, important, but is that you're having a positive impact in the way that you do your business. You want, our shareholder at Groundworks is Community Living Toronto. They expect us to behave ethically. They expect us to, favor people with disabilities in our employment practices. But we're not bound by that. There's some expectation there. But the point is to make profit to put back to the organization. So the B Corp certification, we're not B Corp certified yet, but it's a lot to go through. Corbrook, our partner on the packaging side, is going through that. So also a great idea as well. I wouldn't lead with that, right? Because the B Corp certification is a lot to get to. We've found that people like the mission, they like what you do, they like you. They're going to buy into what you're doing, whether or not you're B Corp certified. But that might be a goal that you aspire to. Okay. Sure. Sorry. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so and the way we think about this is in terms of the social enterprise that we're doing is to support the work of the charity. So the impact is measured on the charitable side, so that all the profits, 75% of the revenue that is of the profits that are generated from a for-profit organization can be taxably deducted, and sent to the charity. So we will only ever pay tax on 25% of the revenue that we get. So that's the impact in the corp is from the revenue that goes to the charity, and the charity's having the impact. Having said that, again, corporations, there's expectations that you behave ethically, that you're an equal opportunity employer, that you've got good EDI practices, so you run the organization well, but the impact and measurement there is less about what the corp is doing. In our case, it's more about what the charity's doing. But to your point, others that are starting smaller scale organizations, they work out those metrics, right? We will reduce the amount of pollution involved in transportation. We will have a 50% indigenous workforce. We will corporations will come up with what their impact is, and especially the smaller scale ones. People start out, individual entrepreneurs, with just an idea and a passion, and they pursue that, and that's the impact that they want to have. Does that help, or? Right. Right. It is. It is. So yeah, great point. And I can't, there are resources out there. One of the examples that I saw when I was in Amsterdam was there's tours in cities, right, or haunted walks and all this stuff, right? They were having the tours led by people that were formerly homeless, right? So their social enterprise we're a tour company that scares the bejesus out of people on Halloween and runs people through the scary parts of cities. The impact is that the staff that are leading you on the tour guides also happen to be people with lived experience in homelessness, right? And now they're employed. You're not going to them because they're homeless, because they're an employer of homeless people. That you're going there because you want to tour the city. But it's that. So with your location, there might be stuff along those lines, and there's also a lot of resource out there around through the Social Enterprise World Forum and that might be of assistance. Great project though. It feels like just hearing you talking, there's a lot of opportunity for impact there. Yeah. monetize them. To be, yeah, yeah. Yeah, so we had we started off Groundworks with about $100,000 investment from non-government money that we loaned to the organization. Then the organization paid it back. This sort of the seed money to get things rolling. So there are absolutely rules around what you can do and what you can't do, and that. And certainly with government money, you can't ever touch that for any of these kind of ventures and enterprises, again, which is why we went with setting up a for-profit corporation, because the rules are just so permissive around what you do, right? You're just to serve the interests of the stakeholder, of the shareholder, of which Community Living Toronto happens to be, the only one. No, no, it was money that we had from other purposes that we invested in that. Going forward with Canada's Sustainable Finance Fund, and that, if you Google that, the Social Finance Canada, there's a page on the government's website that talks more about how this will be. There'll be more opportunities for this down the road for organizations that are in the situation many of us are in. You want to do something, you can't get capital. We have a lot of assets right now. The way the economy's tightening up, we can't get money from a bank, and so the social finance fund understands with what we're going through, and they're more of a partner because they understand the business. Van City is a community bank. What do they call them? Trust company out of Vancouver that's now in Toronto. That's another source of sort of patient capital or capital that will fund purpose, not just profit. So, sorry, yeah, go ahead. Yep. I don't know. um, and again, because the Social Finance Fund, and I first heard about this in 2018, or 2019, right? It's been 4 years to get this up and going and launching. It's just now launching. So I don't know yet what the rules are going to be. We hope it is a source of good capital like they've done in other parts of the world and other parts of Canada, but I don't know. I don't know yet. But there is absolutely risk with it, obviously, right? If you're running it, there is risk, so you have to proceed with caution. Sure, yeah, please. Yeah. There wasn't a maximum. Like, I don't know that they've got any rules. It's just I had lunch with their CEO a couple of weeks ago, and they've got 5 projects that they've approved and vetted that they can't announce yet because of whatever the rule. Like, they just haven't launched the program, but the investments were between $500,000 and $10 million. I don't think he was saying we will only do $10 million, but but they're an investment company that's got a different lens on investment than other venture capital firms would have. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the next few years. So, yeah.
On your sunk cost fallacy, this is a little more personal question.
Yeah.
I've been volunteering for a not-for-profit organization, or now it's charitable. How do you keep up when the inflows are low? And how do you really motivate yourself to go out and do that again?
That's a great. I don't know. How do you keep up? So if you're working for not-for-profit and your revenues aren't keeping up with what your mission is, then you've got to figure that out. You've got to ask hard questions about: are we doing it the right way? Can we reorganize? How do we get funding to become stable? It's I've worked in the not-for-profit sector most of my career. It's no fun constantly being cup in hand, looking for stuff to just stay afloat. It's not. So I think there's 86,000 charities. Are there other charities that you can align with that do this work? Is there a different model you can copy or work with? Those are the kind of questions when you get into that. Can you survive as a going concern anymore? But sure.
So you mentioned about the number of charities. Do you know what's the number of social enterprises in Canada?
I don't. Well, and part of that is because there's no category of social enterprise, right? So there's charities, not-for-profits, and for-profits, right? So, and you don't have to subdivide within that. So Groundworks would just be considered another for-profit, another corporation. There's nothing that distinguishes us from being a social purpose organization. Again, Nova Scotia has that kind of designation. BC does as well. We don't. So I don't know what that is. I, so I would say that in a few areas of Canada, and I mentioned Halifax and I mentioned BC, Halifax being the one that I was most impressed with, that it is really like it's not so cutthroat as it can be, and there is sort of a more, I felt it, more of a collaborative approach. And this conference, the social enterprise, people are all there for the same. Like there was a good. I can't lie. I love this stuff. So there was a good vibe in the room at that place, and lots of people looking to collaborate and share ideas. And now again, people are coming from all over the world, so it's not like you're competing with the social enterprise coffee shop that's your neighbor. But still, it was a good collaborative vibe. I think we're probably. Done. Thanks so much for taking the afternoon, and we're happy to talk with anybody else. Reach out afterwards if you have questions, and we'll let you know how this goes as we dive more into our social enterprises. Thank you.